beyond borders.
It's Borderline
with Ireti Bakare-Yusuf.
From Washington to Beijing, Moscow to Abuja, London to Kigali, the world is shifting fast. Elections are shaping destinies, wars are redrawing borders, economies are rising and falling, and global alliances are being tested like never before. But what does it all mean for you?
With a new administration and a new president in the White House trying to put an end to the war.
I didn't know the historical context, what the state of Israel means for them.
Join the fearless Ireti Bakare-Yusuf on Borderlines every Friday at 4 p.m. on Nigeria Info 99.3.
Good afternoon. Lagos, Nigeria, the diaspora, Israel, Palestine. Those of us who listen to, those of you who listen to us in Europe, welcome to Borderlines, the only show that takes you beyond borders. My name is Ireti Bakare-Yusuf. So, we have a fantastically interesting show for you today. And of course, as you know, on Borderlines, you will be able to join me to talk to my guest, ask him and her questions at the right time when I open up the lines. So keep the phone numbers handy: 0201-277-0993, 0201-465-7190, or as I'm in conversation with my guest, you can send a message to 0809-597-5805. So let me introduce you to my guest. He's here already. He's joining us all the way from Palestine, we are proud to say. His name is Sam Stein. He is an American-Israeli human rights activist currently residing in Israel. Sam has engaged in anti-occupation work, standing in solidarity with Palestinian residents of the West Bank. Actually, I think, Sam, you live in the West Bank, don't you? Oh, I can't hear you. Why am I not hearing you? Are you on mute? No, you're not on mute. Then there's an issue with the volume. I need our technical guys to fix the volume, please. Sam, just 1 second and we will see how we can get this done. Whilst they're doing that, let me just give you guys a background. For decades, the Israeli occupation of Palestine has been a critical issue in global politics. It began in 1947, as you all know. We've done this on this show many times. It's now 76 years since the Nakba, so that's almost 8 decades. However, October 7th, 2003 saw us change, saw everything changed, if you like. Hamas's incursion into Israel, which killed, I think, 1,200 people, if number 7 right, and they kidnapped over 300. Now, since there has, in between that, Israel then declared war on Hamas. However, it was war on Gaza. As a result of that, a genocide, and it has been qualified as a genocide was committed by Israel. Even the ICJ actually they ruled it as a plausible genocide at the time. Thousands, or is it, I think some 800, 700 scholars of genocide have actually qualified it as a genocide. Sam is here to talk to us about Israeli human rights, pro-Palestine activism, and in particular, because he lives in the West Bank, he's going to tell us what's going on in the West Bank. They are still trying to fix Sam's the volume on the technical part, so that's why you're hearing me talking. Once they're able to fix that, we will be back and Sam will be joining me. I can see him. He's already online, so there's no problem there. It's just a volume issue. So as I was saying, since President Trump became president of the United States, we've now had a ceasefire. That ceasefire is in 2 phases. The first phase has been completed. There's been an exchange, although prolonged, there's been an exchange of hostages. Hostages from the Israeli side, hostages from the Palestinian side. Okay? Now, since then, we've had a halt, you could call it that. A halt in the exchanges. We're supposed to be in phase 2 of that ceasefire agreement. Israel has put a stop to phase 2. That's number 1. Number 2 is that Israel...
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, yes. I think
there we go.
Now. Okay, excellent. Sam, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Excellent. And thank you for the great introduction.
It's an absolute honor to have you here. The work you've been doing is quite exceptional, and in particular, you're putting your life at risk. Before I continue, tell us about what happened to you yesterday, because I've seen it on your handle. I'd like us to start from there and then work our way back. Is that all right?
Definitely, no problem. So 2 days ago on Wednesday, I was heading to a village in the southern region of the West Bank, in the Bethlehem district, somewhere in between Bethlehem and Hebron, for my work with an organization called Rabbis for Human Rights, where I'm a field coordinator. To basically, this community had fled their homes from rampant settler violence, and then I believe settlers destroyed their homes after they left, and they had a decision from the Israeli Supreme Court saying that they had the right to return to their land and that the army had to protect them. So I went with one other activist to be present for this and document and make sure that the army actually did. And after about 10 minutes, 20 minutes tops, the army showed up, most likely called by nearby settlers, and told me that because it was Area B of the West Bank, as per the Oslo Accords, which is under Palestinian civil control but Israeli military control, that as an Israeli citizen I was not allowed to be there, and that the Palestinians could stay, but I had to leave. Of course, this is kind of right away a certain game of how can they look like they're living up to this order and doing their job without doing it. You know, they didn't kick the Palestinians out, they kicked me out. It's, of course, once I leave, the Palestinians leave because they don't feel safe. And after that, I made my way back to my car, which was parked pretty far away, and it was kind of a mess even getting back. We'll ignore that for now. And I got back, and I had inadvertently parked next to a military base, next to a pillbox. And as the one volunteer who was with me and I were getting into our cars, 2 soldiers came up to us and asked for IDs and asked what we were doing. And we were complying. I showed my ID. I was answering their questions as little as possible, I guess I would say. But, you know, trying to de-escalate and comply. And one of the soldiers became pretty aggressive and started filming and stuck his phone right in the volunteer's face, and then I began filming. And as soon as I did that, one of the soldiers told me that I messed up and that was 6 hours of my life down the drain, referencing the fact that the military can detain people for up to 6 hours. He immediately began attacking me, trying to steal my phone, trying to put it in front of my face to open it up with biometric lock, which I don't use for this exact reason, and told me that I was in big trouble because I had assaulted a soldier, again, while attacking me. So kind of like really want to, you know, show what the gaslighting in this area can look like and how Orwellian this regime is. And he told me that if I didn't tell him the code to my phone, he would kill me. I regrettably complied. He then zip-tied me and blindfolded me along with the other volunteer and dragged us both into the military base and forced us to kneel on the ground while he looked through my phone, found that I was an activist, ironically found that I was Jewish through that. It seems that they all thought I was Palestinian until somewhere around this, unclear. One of the soldiers said, oh, he must be Jewish. He goes by Shmuel, which is the Hebrew version of Sam, and he speaks Hebrew. And they still hated me when they found out I was Jewish. In a lot of ways, they hated me more because when you're Palestinian, you're just the enemy, so to speak, in quotes. But when you're a left-wing Jew, especially one with Israeli citizenship, standing in solidarity with Palestinians, you're a traitor, and that's almost worse. They were all calling me traitors and then berating me, but the violence pretty much stopped after that. One soldier hit me lightly once or twice, but nothing severe. And the internal debate amongst the soldiers, talking amongst themselves, was basically, how do they treat this? How easy do they go on me because I'm Jewish, but I'm, according to them, a traitor? And the treatment, the difference was night and day. That harassment aside, they undid my zip ties and put on a new pair that they left much lighter. They loosened the blindfold they put on me. I can even see out of my left eye. They just didn't put it on securely. Walking back and forth, harassing me a little, some more than others, while one said to me that I'm a traitor and that Arabs don't, they never said Palestinian, it's all just Arabs, that Arabs don't like traitors and that I would be the first one they killed. This is something that I've heard way more than you would think. While Israelis, right-wing fascist Israelis are carrying out violence, they will tell me how much Palestinians and Arabs are the ones who are going to be violent towards me. Eventually, they let the volunteer go with no charges. They dropped him off at a bus station. He took a bus back to Jerusalem. But I was handed over to the police and arrested on the accusation of assaulting a soldier. Was brought to the police station and processed, all things considered, compared to some things that I've been through, compared to certainly some things that fellow activists have been through, was a pretty painless experience. By that point, the whole thing took about an hour. They did heavily restrict my privacy with my lawyer. They wouldn't really leave the vicinity. He was kind of standing in the doorway and being like, "Oh, I'm not in the room." Yeah, but you're right there. And they wouldn't give me a translator, so I had to do the interrogation in Hebrew, which was fine. I'm a fluent Hebrew speaker, but it's not my first language, and I do have the legal right to be interrogated in whatever language that I want, and they didn't comply. And then I was released, fingerprints, mugshot, that sort of thing, and banned from the junction where I was attacked, from the spot of the incident, for 15 days. So even though the process in the police station was much less painful and traumatic than with the soldiers, it was this constant through line of just zero accountability and checks and balances and a complete abuse of power.
Can you hear me? Right. Thank you so much for that. When I saw that on your handle, it was really quite harrowing, I have to say. But as an Israeli, albeit a human rights activist, etc., it must have sort of taken you to a place where, they thought you were Palestinian. They treated you a particular way. Of course, they never say Arabs, as you rightly said. And then once they learned that you were Israeli, in actual fact, it almost doubled an Israeli that was pro-Palestine. It almost doubled, their violence in a way. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I would say that, the physical violence that a Palestinian would face and does face in that scenario is more than I can imagine, completely uncomparable to what I experienced. But as you kind of pointed to, the hatred and the vitriol that I received is in its own bizarre way, I don't want to say worse, but has this separate status.
In one of your posts, what I found it interesting when you said, "I'm originally from New York." Tell me, and that's quite unusual, because given that most Israelis will say, I am an Israeli, perhaps I grew up in New York, or, whatever. In your case, you're like, I'm originally from New York. Yes, I went through this, I went through that. How does Sam from New York, NYC, end up in Palestine? Tell us about that.
Hopefully I won't waste all of our time. But
No. Okay, I'll give you like a minute or two quickly. to tell us about that, because I found it's
good.
interesting the way you described yourself.
Yeah. So trying to do this, succinctly, I grew up in a very, very right-wing, very, very religious family, and grew up on a completely one-sided narrative of the reality here. The occupation was something that was always put in air quotes and kind of dismissed as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. And long story short, after spending a gap year actually living in an illegal settlement, that I didn't know that, I didn't know what that meant, I didn't know anything. When I was 18, I then went to New York for college, and through another Jewish religious friend of mine and through some other stuff, kind of slowly but surely pieced together what the actual reality is here. But through my upbringing and the time I spent here as a kid and on that gap year, really had a deep, deep connection to this place and wanted to come back. And that never really went away. As much as I learned, as much as kind of the veil was pulled away, it just didn't go away. And I basically told myself almost 6 years ago when I moved here that, this is a responsibility. If you're doing this, then you're doing it. You don't get to just go hang out on the beach in Tel Aviv. So that was August 2019. I got here and kind of just threw myself into it. I was not an activist before that in the US or anywhere that I spent time, but just kind of got put in touch with people, emailed strangers, talked to a bunch of people and found a group called All That's Left, which is a group of diaspora Jews based in Israel, Palestine, engaging in anti-occupation work, very grassroots collective that, I owe everything to. And yeah, just kind of kept showing up, just kind of didn't know what I was doing, looked to the leaders around me, and very quickly protective presence as my main form of activism, doing this documentation work kind of became my niche. And here we are.
So I also saw another post where you talked about what was going on. Is it Masayata? Masafia, yeah. Right. Where the Palestinian film was the one that just won the Oscar where it was filmed. Tell us, were you involved in that film? And I'm actually curious to know how they were able to actually film that, given what's going on in that area, in that place.
Yeah, definitely. So I wasn't involved in any official capacity, but, friends and partners with the whole team. It's funny, when the movie first came out and we all first saw it, I just watched it thinking, I must be just out of frame for this entire movie. I was almost mad that it didn't make, that it didn't sneak in there for a second. But obviously we're all, over the moon for them. And it kind of, your question is very spot on, because a huge reason that they were able to secure so much incredible footage, and I can't tell you how much footage we've lost because phones are stolen or cameras were broken or confiscated by the army or whatever it is, but because when you have all these internationals and Jews and Israelis helping out with this work, when they're the ones holding the cameras, obviously Bassel also filmed the tremendous footage, but has that support and solidarity from these more privileged people that face so much less violence from the state forces and settlers. You're able to get that footage without it being damaged or destroyed in some capacity or another.
One of the things we've been, Borderlines has been covering Israel, Palestine. We've had guests from both sides, more so from Palestine, because we often have an issue getting Israeli guests to actually come on our show. Why do you think Israelis are less accepting of invitations, so to speak, than Palestinians?
There's definitely a lot to unpack with that, but as shortly as possible, especially more Zionist, moderate to right-wing Israelis really are raised on this idea that the world is out to get them, and that there's geography involved in that, in places that they have a notion of being more pro-Palestinian or less pro-Palestinian. But there is this victim complex, I guess, that just runs incredibly deep.
Let's talk about narratives, because again, you will hear our callers. We have listeners rather, and lots, and thousands of listeners to this show. Every other week, somebody will call in and say, you're constantly talking about Palestine. You're constantly talking about Palestine. But I saw a post, one of your posts, where at the bottom you said, do not be distracted. Keep talking. Why do you think it's important for us to keep talking about what's going on in Palestine?
I'll say definitely, for me, having Israeli citizenship coming from the U.S., it's because it's a Western issue, and I think that's why it gets the attention that it does and that it deserves. In the modern day, obviously the news cycle moves so quickly. It's incredible that Palestine has held the spotlight that it has for this long, even though I do think we're kind of seeing it slip a little. And it's our money that's funding it. If you're American, if you're Canadian, if you're British, whatever it is, your money is funding the atrocities that Israel is carrying out. And you can't get distracted. You have to just over and over and over again shout from the rooftops, march in the streets, vote, disrupt whatever tool you have available to get your government to stop contributing to these human rights abuses and war crimes. Indeed. You have President Trump right now as the president of America. So I can call you American, I can call you Israeli American, whichever you prefer me to use. As an American, with somebody like President Trump, who has actually ensured this ceasefire, which we couldn't get under President Biden, I don't know whether you were a Republican before or you're a Democrat before. What does it feel like right now, being an Israeli American, knowing what is going on in Palestine and knowing the huge part that America play, and how consistently experts will always tell you the only country that can put a stop to this is American? And yet here you are, Sam, ordinary like me, doing your very best to ensure equality, human rights, and get the voice of the oppressed out there. How does it feel being an Israeli American right now? I think bizarre, especially in recent events, with Trump being the one to secure a ceasefire, as you pointed out, but then peddling so much anti-Palestinian racism and putting out this plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza and talking about annexation and doing what he's doing with Mahmoud Khalil and other dissidents, especially Arab and Palestinian dissidents in the U.S. This just what a agent of chaos mixed bag he is always concerning, to say the least. And as far as, being kind of assigned to the government carrying these acts out, and to the government that, as you said, is the one pulling the strings, that has all the power and the only one who can stop it. It's funny, I felt one of the reasons I came here was that I felt so much more able to make a difference here than I did in the U.S. Not just in regards to Palestinian life and welfare and dignity, but just kind of in the society here as a whole, this smaller society where I am kind of the represented person, as opposed to being in the U.S., where as a Jewish American who always grew up in the way I did, I didn't quite feel like the face of the country, I guess I would say. But now there's this feeling that the sentiment in left-wing Israeli spaces and with anybody doing this work on the ground is, we know how important it is, but it's literally a Band-Aid. Everything we do is to just kind of make the suffering a little bit worse, make, a little bit better, make Palestinian life, for whoever we're able to, just a little more dignified and humane, but we don't think that this is what's going to stop the suffering. That has to come from outside and specifically from the U.S. So there is this funny dissonance of wherever I go and end up, and I actually will be returning to the U.S. very soon. I am deeply intertwined in this struggle. It's just about whether or not it's inside in the belly of the beast or kind of in the core pulling all the strings.
May I ask, what do your parents have to say about this and your friend circle? I see you laughing.
The $1 million question. My parents, to say the least, are not thrilled, and I would say I think confused more than anything. I've always been a black sheep, so I guess in a lot of ways they're just like, it's just Sam being
yeah. And your friends?
And, so my friends, I don't know how. I guess kids, have a funny way of finding their kin. All of my best friends from my childhood that I'm still in very close touch with are outspoken anti-Zionist left-wing Jews.
Right.
And now my social circle here is obviously pretty much overwhelmingly left-wing Jewish activists. So it's funny how that worked out, and that's been very supportive. And there are people, other friends from my upbringing that I'm still in touch with to varying degrees that have had like a whole whirlwind of responses. People have absolutely, blocked me on social media and yelled at me and whatever. I think it's died down a little as I've become more and more adamant. The people that, got it out of the way earlier, I guess, just ripped the Band-Aid off, and some people just think I'm beyond saving or whatever, so they don't engage anymore.
October.
But I have changed minds also.
Sorry, go ahead.
I've had, just to say that on the other side, I've changed minds, which has been incredibly meaningful. I've seen people from my community who grew up the exact same way I did, like say and reach out, whether text, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, and say your posts have really, really made me do all of this differently.
Incredible. Is that the same, before I even move to my next question, is that the same for young Jewish Israeli Americans who are outside of Israel? What is it for young Israelis who are inside, who are born, bred and reared and have only ever known Israel all their life? How does that match? Do they support what you do, or do they feel totally different? So
unfortunately, there's a trend that kind of a lot of experts and sociologists and politicians and analysts within Israel have pointed out, that the young generation in a lot of ways is becoming more right-wing, which is obviously very scary, but becoming a lot more dogmatic, and that's led to the rise of some of the extremist parties that are currently heavy players in Israeli politics. I will say, as a kernel of optimism, something that I think gets a little overlooked is that I think that the Israeli left, that people will say does not exist but does exist, is becoming a lot more hardline and radical and unabashed in its stances than I think, certainly at the face, at kind of the frontier, than it used to be. I don't want to erase the people that came before me. There were always, Israeli leftists standing in absolute solidarity with Palestinians since 1947, since the Balfour Declaration. But for the past several decades, especially since the Oslo Accords, the face of the front-facing presentation of the Israeli left in terms of big, well-known groups and NGOs was always two-state liberalism, basically. And critiquing the occupation of the occupied territories of the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, and to a much lesser extent the Golan Heights, without any real analysis of how we got here and the Nakba and the state of Palestinian life within Israel's borders. And in my experience, that really is changing. And I think Palestinians are noticing, honestly. I think I've seen a massive difference, and I don't want to speak too much on this, obviously not being Palestinian, but the new vanguard of left-wing Israelis is acknowledging the Nakba and saying that this is all built on a project of ethnic cleansing, and that it's not just end the occupation and everything goes to normal. It's right of return for Palestinians. It's, land back and full acknowledgement of the atrocities that have happened. And that's been incredibly, incredibly powerful to see. And as I pointed to early, my observation is definitely that certain Palestinians are noticing, and it's really changing the dynamic on the ground of how people think about the reality here and how people think about existence and resistance and co-resistance and the possibility of the future here.
I saw an interview with you that you did with Daisy Gedon, who has actually been a guest, one of our favorite guests on this show. And I remembered, I think you were talking about how October 7th, before October 7th, there were always pro-Palestinian or human rights Israelis who were campaigning. And there were also those who were like, I know this is wrong, but I'm not quite sure why it's wrong. But after October 7th, everybody seems to be clearer as to why it's wrong. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. Something that unfortunately needs to be pointed out is that from October 7th, there were absolutely people that were on the left, or at least thought themselves as being on the left, that this has become kind of a dubbed Israeli phenomenon of sobering up, that after October 7th, they kind of turned on a dime and said, oh, well, this scary, violent attack happened, and now I'm done. And it, obviously, something that can be unpacked forever, but the lack of political analysis, living here, being Israeli, being here when October 7th happened was terrifying. None of us really knew what was happening at first, and we could see all these people were killed. But for me and for all of my peers, that aside, we this was not outside of our political analysis. Nobody predicted October 7th. Nobody predicted, the specifics of what happened on October 7th. But none of us were doing this work because we think that there's no violence and that there's no violent resistance, and that Palestinians, are the perfect victims, to use a phrase that Mohammed al-Kurdi uses a lot. We were doing this work because no matter what, Palestinians deserve dignity and respect and, reparations. So for us in that camp, it was scary, but didn't needle at all. And absolutely following the genocide and the atrocities that happened since, it's woken people up. I think way more abroad in the international Jewish community, we're really starting to see a lot of people just be like completely appalled and disillusioned by what is being carried out and what's happening. But as I think, I mentioned to Daisy, and Andre, who was on the show with me, mentioned to her, we've seen it. We've met people in the field. You ask them, oh, well, maybe you decided to do this, and there's like the year and a half of genocide. I'm just watching this nonstop. Like, I need to do something. And I've noticed that that's kind of become characteristic of Israeli de-radicalization from the brainwashing that they go in this society, and then re-radicalization of like commitment to Palestinian liberation, is that kind of every few years there's this watershed moment. For people my age, it was 2014 and the siege on Gaza and the operation on Gaza that happened that year. For people a little younger than me, it's 2018 and the right of return, or 2021 and Operation. I can't even remember the name of the operation. Israel's war on Gaza that year, and the Unity Intifada. And now for this generation, young Gen Z, Gen Alpha, whatever it is, it's October 7th and the ongoing genocide, and it's not sustainable. Especially in the modern world, and the incredible job Palestinians have done of spreading their stories and their lived realities through social media and through other means. Every few years now, you can't say you didn't know anymore. And every few years, a massive chunk of the society is just disillusioned from the project.
Indeed, you can't say you don't know. Right, I'm going to open up the lines 0201-277-0993. Those of you who say I say it too fast, 0201-465-7190. You can send a message to 0809-597-5805. There's the continued discussion about two-state solution. Everybody talks about it. We have several scholars who will say to you, that's a red herring. What does a two-state solution look like? Where is the line going to be? As somebody who lives in the West Bank, since the ceasefire, we've seen the violence shift to the West Bank. Talk to us about what Israel is doing in the West Bank that you have seen.
Yeah, I would say the aspect of Israel's operation in the West Bank since the ceasefire that I've observed most directly is the massive crackdown on Palestinian freedom movement. You know, right away there was settler attacks and retaliation, and the military carrying out atrocities in Palestinian cities and refugee camps, but areas that I have less access to and have not really been so present in. But throughout the West Bank and in Massachusetts, where I am, all the way to the north, there are gates popping up every single day and checkpoints, and just you can't get into cities anymore. And since October 7th, they couldn't get into half these places, but now it's just become really impossible. The village that I live in, a gate popped up outside the village on the main road. You know, the only road leading out of the village and leading close to the nearby city of Yatta. And thank God it hasn't caused too many issues, but it's the kind of thing that just can be closed and that's it. It's almost worse than a checkpoint. You know, a checkpoint you might get through. This gate just means go home, you're not going anywhere. And there have been reports, people have personally told me, and there are reports about it online, of Palestinians dying because they needed urgent medical care and haven't been able to get into a city and access a hospital.
If I may just interrupt you, Sam, let me just answer that call. Is that okay? Hello?
No problem.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes, I need you to turn the radio off. Please speak up. Your name, where you're calling from, and your question, please. No. Wrong. No, not Wazobia. Sorry. Right. Okay. That's somebody calling one of our sister stations. Right. Sorry. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Just that Palestinians have died from this oppression and freedom movement, which is to show that it's not just quote unquote kind of a matter of dignity and respect, but it is a deadly issue, and it goes two ways. This crackdown on freedom movement inherently, because the main way that Israel does this is they put gates at the entrance to the major Palestinian cities that are Area A under the Oslo Accords, and according to Israeli law, Israelis aren't allowed into these cities. So right there, they've created these enclaves that they have this, working assumption that is true 99.9% of the time, that it's only Palestinians in these areas. So they've already sectioned them off that way. And they're like, okay, we can put gates all around the city, and then it both means that people can't get out, and in my opinion, much worse, that people in rural villages that use these cities as hubs to everything they need in life can't get in. And they do this in a way that Israeli settlers in the West Bank, from the absolute most radical ones on the hilltops carrying out these horrific attacks to kind of the most moderate ones in settlements that are thought of, unfortunately, as just suburbs of Jerusalem that barely even think about the fact that they're in the West Bank, can drive about not noticing that this has happened. Whether they would care even if they did is another thing, but it doesn't affect their lives at all.
Is a two-state solution possible, in your opinion, or is it time to consider a one-state solution? And if it's a one-state solution, could that work? Is it possible for that to work?
I think a two-state solution is impossible. I'm definitely not, breaking new mold on that one, as you pointed out. The settlements have purposely made it impossible. And furthermore, Palestinian school of thought has certainly forever been, in my opinion, is that it wasn't the moral option to begin with. It kind of entrenches that separation and creates just two ethno-states, one with a massive amount of power over, compared to the other one, and dignifies the Nakba. And I think that, even speaking completely selfishly as somebody with Israeli citizenship for a second, not even as Sam Stein, the activist, just I don't want two states. I don't want this entrenched separation of walls and borders. I want to be able to drive around and go visit my friends in Ramallah and then go to the beach in Tel Aviv. And I think that it's, we're a million miles away from it, unfortunately. I can't really pretend otherwise. It's going to be brutal. It's going to be, it's going to take so much work to make it feasible. And something that a lot of people have pointed out is that a lot of people will leave. A lot of, certainly the vast majority, arguably, of Israeli settlers in the West Bank and also Israeli citizens living in Israel would not want to live in an equal society and would leave. But, it would obviously have a ton of tension. There's no trust. There's no camaraderie and not enough desire for a lived society, but it's the only way forward. Indeed. And I don't know what the process to get people there looks like, but it's the only way.
Indeed. Sorry, I couldn't answer your call because I didn't want to interrupt, Sam. You can call again on 0201-277-0993, 0201-465-7190, and the WhatsApp number is 0809-597-5805. I may have to interrupt Sam if you do call back. Sorry. Right. So going back to, and this is the thing, is that in order for a one-state solution to be a reality, we're going to need oh, there we go. Now they're all calling. Bear with me, Sam. Hello? Hello?
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Please speak up.
Yes.
Oops. Hello? Hello?
Good evening, Ireti. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
All right. This is Kenny. Good job.
Okay, go ahead, Kenny.
Yes. Speaking with your guest, Sam.
Sam, yeah.
Sam, good evening. Shalom, my friend.
Shalom, thank you.
All righty. So I just want to know, I hope this is not a redundant question, but here it goes. What would you say the ideal is in terms of what you want to see in the West Bank? And do you think it's achievable? And what impact, long-term impact, do you think it will have in the world as in general?
What the long-term impact of what? Sorry, go ahead. Say it again.
The ideal. I'm asking him what would
what's
say
Sam's
the
ideal? Okay.
Yes,
of peace.
For the West
what does
Bank.
peace look like? Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
And what does he think it will be achievable?
Right.
And what is the long-term impact globally?
Okay, thank you so much, Kenny. That's a great one. Sam, well, the lines are not going, so I'll let you answer that now.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely kind of in line with what I was saying, that my utopia, I guess, is one, equal state, full rights and dignity for everyone living here. And in terms of whether or not it's achievable, I think people would almost look at me as a crazy optimist for saying, yes, I do think it's achievable. I don't know if it'll take 50 years or 100 years or 150 years, but I do think it's achievable. Every moment of strife and every moment of atrocities in human history has passed, and this too shall pass. I don't know. We'll see what it looks like. It might be 50% Israeli, 50% Palestinian. It might be 90% Palestinian, 10% Israeli. Who knows? But I do really, truly, in my heart, think that it's possible, and my deep desire to see it is what keeps me going.
It's interesting. I mean, I'm glad Kenny sort of, it's a segue into the question I was going to ask before. It's interesting that you think it's possible, but would there not have to be a change of, Israeli policy as a country, the way Israel sees itself as a country, the way their politics is shaped, the Knesset and the ideology of Israel, the Israel state itself? Would there not to be a need for a complete overhaul of that in order for that one-state solution to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. It would need to be a state of all of its citizens. And there was actually in East Jerusalem, there was a party that ran under the name in the Jerusalem local elections last year. A party ran under the name all of its citizens, which is absurdly indicative of how that's a new notion here. That a country or city can be for all of its citizens and not just the Jewish one. And that is what we're working with, both in terms of civilian consensus and the political mechanism in place. And it absolutely needs to be overhauled. And I think that there are people, doing work to undermine those norms in Israeli society. And I definitely view an aspect of my work to be that. A part of me, to me, spreading everything I see as loudly as I can and as far as possible, especially within the community I grew up with, is all at the hopes that, we'll just wake up one person at a time. If I can get one person to kind of just acknowledge what's happening here, then it's all worth it. And they don't need to become,
So would that then be a
hard.
secular state? Would that be a secular state?
Yes.
With, not one defined by religion? Yeah, indeed. Sorry, people, you keep calling while Sam is talking and I don't want to interrupt him. You can call back. We have exactly 5 minutes remaining. So if you want to call, you can call in now. Okay, there you are. Hello?
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. What's your name and where you calling from, please?
Well, my name is Engineer Kundai. I'm calling you from Ikorodu.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, the question I want to ask, what's the view of your guest on the second phase of these...
of the ceasefire. Yeah.
Of the ceasefire, because it is very crucial.
Yes.
And I think it is very, very difficult.
Thank you.
So what's his view on it?
Thank you. Great one. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think the second phase is going to happen as we're all wanting it to?
Unfortunately, it's hard to have hope. We like you said, we all want it to happen. We want that full swap of everyone being able to be released and be with their families, the Israelis that are hostage in Gaza and the thousands of Palestinians that are hostage, in an absurdly higher number in the Israeli military prison system. It's clear that Bibi, and much more importantly, the kind of support bloc he's built for him that are the only reason he's able to stay in power, which is the far right, Israeli political parties are playing all sorts of games that they can to push that off and stall. First, an extension of phase one, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the best option possible as far as putting off phase two, but at least there's something to much, much worse ways of pushing it off, of just trying to sabotage the ceasefire. And even in a more moderate sphere of Israeli society that is not the far left, that's become very fed up with this war, largely because they know it's killing the hostages and they know that a deal is the only way to rescue the Israeli hostages. It's become a Hebrew word to torpedo, has become a loan word in Israeli society and in Hebrew media. It always, in the context of Bibi, is, Netanyahu is torpedoing a deal.
Right.
That is what we're up against. So I don't, kind of coming full circle, but with enough international pressure, which basically means with enough U.S. pressure, it's possible. But Bibi and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and the far right and this government are going to do everything they can to prevent it.
Indeed, Sam, we're about to close the show. Obviously you're speaking to us in Nigeria. We will continue to talk about this because often when people say, "Oh, you're talking about this too much," and whatever, I feel compelled to ask them, when it was South Africa, did anybody feel we were talking about it too much? One has to ask that question because oppression is oppression is oppression. right? Injustice to all, to one, is injustice to all. And that's what you stand against, Sam. You stand against injustice, and you're all about human rights to all. All I can say is thank you so very, very, very much for telling Nigerians and our listeners exactly what is going on in the West Bank, and the fact that there are lots of people like you. So people need to stop thinking all Israelis are the same, all Jews are the same. Everybody hates the Palestinians. Indeed, Sam. Let me give you 30 seconds. Give us your last words. Hope.
Yeah, I would like, first, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak to a part of the world that I've had no interaction or exposure to before. So thank you to you and to everyone in Nigeria listening. I would just kind of say, like you said, keep talking about Palestine, and what is talking about enough is massive human rights abuses. You were so on the nose. And shameless self-plug, follow me on Instagram at Sam_Abraham, Abraham. Follow All That's Left and Youth of Sumud, which is a Palestinian group, and Bassel Adra, who just won the Oscar for No Other Land. You. Follow Palestinians on the ground. And
thank you. They're screaming at me that I've got to go. Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you. We will post your Instagram on our handle anyway, so they will find you there. God bless you and have a fabulous weekend.
And
Stay
feel
safe.
free to DM me. I try to read my DMs as I try to read all of my DMs. If you have any questions, message me on Instagram.
Excellent.
Hopefully I will find the time to answer.
Thank you.
All about it. All about it. Chocolate. That's great. Chocolate. Tastes yummy, yummy. Full of
99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.